am 65 years old, but sometimes I feel that I carry the weight of 3 whole lives. I had come to the city, exchanging the warm and comforting land of my little ranch in Texas Hill Country for the sharp angles of concrete and the glass of New York City, only to retire and live with my son, Edward. I thought it was a necessary concession for my age. The people, the hospitals, everything conveniently within reach. Instead, I found myself tied to a disturbing and strange rhythm. Every night, precisely at 3 o'clock in the morning, the shower turned on. The sound was a visceral assault. Water gushing through the pipes on the wall next to my headboard, strong enough to suggest that someone was not only bathing, but trying to carve the very soul of the night. A cold and ruthless early morning, my instinct for survival rooted, fought against my growing irrational curiosity. I slipped out of bed. The silence of the luxurious Upper East Side apartment amplified by the frenetic flood behind the wall. What I saw through the narrow hole in the bathroom door, slightly open, not only scared me, it made my bones freeze, freezing the breath in my throat. The next morning, before the city had fully woken up, I packed my suitcase and left silently. Without discussions, without explanations, just a quick and necessary withdrawal to the autumn leaf, a private residence for older adults in Connecticut. Like leaving a house when the deep and undeniable cold settles in. Before this golden cage, my life had developed in the silent constancy of our small town in Texas Hill Country, not far from the Brazos River. The late autumn clung to the windows like a stifling stream of air, a dry and poor cold that slipped under the painted frames. A small old house, with its charming windows carved in lavender blue, had been witness to each phase of my existence. A young Spanish teacher at Roosevelt High School, a tired widower, and finally a man, whose hands, now slightly stained and sprinkled with silver hairs, still automatically extended to straighten the fitting curtains and put the copper teapot on the gas stove, performing the same rituals for decades. A photograph of my late wife, Faith, still rigid and imposing in her golden frame. Even in death, her eyes seemed to contain an expectation of obedience, that silent demand that I had learned to recognize even before she opened her mouth. When I looked at that severe face, with high cheekbones and frowning mouth, 2 complex emotions were always intertwined. A deep pity for a life shortened to 52 years, for an aggressive cancer, and a silent and profound relief of no longer having to anticipate the heavy and demanding echo of her heels on the polished wooden floor of the corridor. They say that discretion demands to speak only with the kindness of the dead, that propriety orders silence over the absence of those who have left. But the purple and yellow curtains that you meticulously hid under the thick foundation applied with trembling fingers in front of the bathroom mirror, and the sharp words that struck harder than a leather belt. "You are pathetic, Arthur. A real man would not cry. You deserve what you receive." They do not simply disappear when the oak coffin is closed in the cemetery of the hills. They simply retreat to a quieter corner of your memory, waiting for a new trigger, a familiar aroma, a tone of voice, a gesture that awakens everything. I had been an insufficient partner for a hard and authoritarian woman from a middle-class family in San Diego, who considered me a simple prep school teacher without property. Faith saw Edward and me as her personal possessions, extensions of her will. Our house functioned according to her strict rules. Meals on fixed schedules, absolute silence while she graded her own exams. She taught mathematics at the local high school. Prohibition of receiving friends without prior authorization. She managed the finances with an iron fist, giving me a monthly allowance as if I were a child. Our salvation, ironically, came the day we received 2 contrasting pieces of news. A gray and rainy Tuesday in March. We found out in the morning that her pancreatic cancer was too advanced for surgery. The oncologist at Mount Sinai Hospital had called us to his cold office with white walls. He made us sit in uncomfortable orange plastic chairs and announced with professional compassion, 3 months, maybe 6, with palliative chemotherapy. That same afternoon, the mailman brought a large official envelope for Edward, his acceptance letter to New York University, NYU. He was 18 years old, bright, hard-working, despite the oppressive atmosphere at home. When he opened the envelope with trembling hands and read the first words, "We are pleased to inform you," his face lit up with a pure joy that I had not seen in years. Faith, sitting in her green velvet chair next to the window, looked at our son with a strange expression. Without pride, without joy, only cold calculation. "Well," she simply said, "at least one of you will have triumphed in life." At that moment, I buried all my anger and pain, accumulated during 23 years of marriage, fulfilling my marital duty by pure obligation, not for love. I knew I had to keep the facade, take care of her until the end, so that Edward could begin, and above all, continue his studies without interruption, without the weight of guilt, without having to choose between his dying mother and his future. The next 3 months were a methodical hell. The chemotherapy made her even more irritable, even more cruel. When she vomited, it was my fault for not preparing her herbal tea well. When she had pain, it was because I did not bring her medication fast enough. Edward tried to help, but she drove him away. "Go to study. At least you won't be a failure like your father." I slept on the sofa in the living room, to be available at night. I prepared her meals according to her precise instructions, emptied the basin, changed the dirty sheets, helped her to bathe, enduring her sharp comments about my incompetence. And sometimes, in her lucid moments between doses of morphine, she looked at me with terrible clarity and said, "I know you are waiting for me to die, Arthur. I see it in your eyes. But even dead, I will always be there in your head. You will never truly escape me." She was right. When her eyes finally closed forever, one morning in June, when the roses of the garden perfumed the warm air, I did not feel anything like pain. There was only the immense physical sensation that something impossibly heavy finally slipped from my shoulders. Something that had compressed my breathing, crushed my chest, drowned my voice for 23 whole years. Edward cried at the funeral. He had loved his mother in spite of everything, or perhaps because of everything. Children have that terrible ability to love, even those who hurt them. I remained dry, impassive, enduring the looks of disapproval of Faith's family. "What a cold husband," they whispered, and the educated condolences of my colleagues at school who knew nothing, saw nothing, suspected nothing. It was just the two of us then, father and son, in that house that was too big and too silent. And I turned every ounce of my effort to lift him, believing that his success would justify my sacrifices, would give meaning to all those years of suffering. If Edward triumphed, then everything would not have been in vain. I taught my Spanish classes in high school. I graded exams until late at night, under the light of my desk lamp, my eyes burning with fatigue. I took extra translation work in the afternoons, technical English to Spanish manuals, tedious work, but it paid. Many of our dinners consisted of nothing more than Lipton tea, butter saltines, sometimes a vegetable omelet from the garden when I had the time and energy. Edward went to New York City every Monday morning. He took the bus from the local station. He lived in a tiny room of 200 square feet in Greenwich Village that he shared with another student. He returned on the weekends, thin, tired, but with bright eyes for everything he was learning. He told me about his classes, his teachers, the world that opened before him. It was a long and agonizing test. 5 years of drastic savings, silent sacrifices. But I resisted for him, for both. Edward was bright and motivated, but his temperament was gentle, perhaps too sensitive, vulnerable to criticism. He had inherited my reserved nature, not the cold confidence of his mother. Every time he doubted himself, when his shoulders sank and his voice became a wavering whisper, "Dad, I'm not sure I'm good enough. All the other students seem much smarter than me." I was overwhelmed by a deep concern, fear that years of maternal criticism had marked him too deeply. I always intervened tenderly, reassuring him with words I had never heard myself. "You are smart, Edward. You are capable. You belong there." I worked diligently to build his self-confidence with my patience, with my unconditional support. I really believed that he would develop a solid inner strength. I believed that he would flourish, that he would learn to defend himself, establish limits, recognize his own value. And for a long time, he did not disappoint me. He excelled at NYU, graduating with honors. He got some internships, then a lucrative job at PepsiCo in its international marketing division. He was good at languages. He spoke fluent Spanish and French. He quickly ascended the corporate ladder, becoming product manager, then marketing director for the Central Region. First based in San Diego, then transferred to New York City when he was promoted to regional director for the entire East Coast. I saw him 3 or 4 times a year. He came to spend a weekend at the ranch. We took long walks along the Brazos River. We talked about his projects, his ambitions. He seemed happy, fulfilled. And then, at 32, he announced that he had met someone. "Her name is Paige," he told me on the phone, his voice vibrant with emotion. "She is a corporate lawyer. Brilliant, Dad. Really brilliant. She works for an important international firm. She comes from a distinguished family. Her father is a federal judge. She is impressive." Impressive. The word resonated strangely in my ear. "Do you love her?" I simply asked. Yes. Yes, I love her. She pushes me to be better. She has great ambitions for both of us. She pushes me. She has ambitions. We do not have, but she does. But I kept my doubts to myself. When I met her for the first time, 6 months later, in her Upper East Side apartment for dinner, I understood immediately. Paige Harrison was an elegant and ambitious woman of 30 years. Tall, slender, with brown hair cut in a strict bob. Discreet designer clothes, but obviously expensive. A gray suit by Carolina Herrera. Louboutin black shoes. She moved around the world with a cold confidence that commanded respect. And instinctively, I felt that she was hiding an iron will. "Arthur," she said, tightening my hand. No hug, no warmth, only a professional and firm handshake. "Edward has told me so much about you. A teacher by training, right? What a noble profession." The tone was polite, but something in her eyes, in the way she said, "noble profession," suggested that she found my career charming, but insignificant. The dinner was impeccable. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. The table set with precise precision, fine porcelain, crystal wine glasses, a Cabernet from Napa Valley that had to cost a fortune. Paige talked a lot, mainly about herself, her important cases, her prestigious clients, the senators and CEOs she advised. Edward listened with admiration, his heart beating fast. He looked at her as if he were looking at an inaccessible deity. At one point, accidentally, he spilled a little wine on the white, immaculate tablecloth. Just a few drops. Paige's face froze. For a fraction of a second, I saw something cold pass through her eyes. Then she smiled. A smile that did not reach her eyes. "It's nothing, my love," she said with a soft voice, which nevertheless had something sharp. "But be careful. This tablecloth is from Saks Fifth Avenue. It cost $250. Sorry, Edward murmured, his cheeks reddening. I'm sorry. I'll be careful. Yes, be careful, she repeated. And something in her repetition, in her insistence, made my blood boil. I looked at my son and saw what I had not wanted to see. The way his shoulders had sunk. The way he avoided her gaze. The way he constantly checked his plate, his glass, his clothes, as if he were walking through a minefield. At first I told myself that I was paranoid, that I was projecting my own fears, that Paige was just a demanding woman, a perfectionist, but that was her way of loving. They got married 6 months later, in June, in a luxurious ceremony at the Plaza Hotel. 300 guests, mainly from Paige's family and professional connections. On my side, a handful of colleagues from high school, some neighbors from the town. I felt out of place among all those important people in Armani suits and Dior dresses. Edward looked happy in his three-piece, pearl gray suit. Happy, but nervous. During the ceremony, when he said, "I do," his voice trembled slightly. Paige said, "I do," with absolute certainty, a triumphant smile. For the next 2 years, I saw Edward less and less. He was busy, he told me. Work, Paige's social obligations. They traveled a lot. London, Paris, Tokyo for Paige's work, some vacations in Maui, Geneva. When we talked on the phone, his voice seemed more and more tired, more and more distant. "Are you okay, son?" I asked. Yes, Dad. Just a lot of stress at work. Paige is pushing me to aspire to a CEO position. She says I need to be more ambitious. She says. Always she. And then, 3 years after their marriage, the call. "Arthur, Edward and I have decided that it would be best for you to come and live with us. The move to the city, the hospitals, the care, it is better this way." At first, I felt reassured by their attention. They were young, prosperous, and seemed to care about my well-being. Now, I thought, looking at my rows of well-aligned tomatoes in the garden that I had kept carefully for years, cultivating varieties of Roma, beefsteak, cherry, green zebra tomatoes. My quiet old age is finally here. I imagined myself spending slow mornings in the warm and rich soil of my garden, my fingers sinking into the soil for pots, pulling out weeds, pruning plants. Quiet afternoons reading Robert Frost and John Steinbeck in my armchair next to the window, listening to the regular tick-tock of the grandfather clock that had belonged to my grandfather. Nights walking around the village pond with my neighbors, Mr. Jenkins, who always talked about his roses, Mrs. Smith, who affectionately complained about her grandchildren, discussing the capricious climate, the price of gasoline that was still rising, the renovation work in the old church. I hoped that life would continue in a predictable and peaceful way, like the water of the Brazos River flowing silently in the background of the village, reflecting the cottonwoods and willows. But life, I learned during my 65 years, has a cruel sense of humor when you dare to make plans, when you dare to believe that peace is finally won. I was in the garden, my hands sunk in the wet ground after the rain the night before, checking the tomatoes that began to ripen on their plants. The aroma of the wet and rich soil rose to my nostrils. That old and comforting aroma that reminded me of my childhood on my grandparents' farm. The July sun gently hit my neck, and I heard bees buzzing around the squash blossoms. It was at this precise moment, in this simple and honest perfection, that the cell phone in the pocket of my denim jacket rang, breaking the calm of the afternoon like a stone thrown into a quiet pond. "Hi, Dad. What are you doing?" Edward's voice, even in the simplest greetings, now carried a subjacent vibration of nervousness and hesitation that I did not remember hearing before. His voice had that tense quality like the string of a violin too tight. I washed my hands, stained with black soil, in my old, discolored sink, which Faith had given me 20 years ago and which had miraculously survived. And I offered a smile to the empty air, to the butterflies that fluttered among the rows of vegetables. Admiring the tomatoes, son. They are almost ready to harvest. The beefsteaks are magnificent this year. What's up? Are you okay? A silence a little too long. Paige and I have decided, he announced, and I immediately noticed that he said Paige and I. But the weight of the sentence, the order of the words, suggested that it was she who had decided, and he was just announcing her decision. Pack your things. We come this weekend to pick you up and take you to the city. You are going to live with us in our apartment on the Upper East Side. We have already prepared your room. The word struck me like a physical blow, as if someone had pushed me brutally in the chest. I froze, my hands still holding a handful of wet soil. The thought of leaving the house with blue windows, the garden that I had cultivated for 30 years, the fresh fog of the morning rising on the grass like a bride's veil, the church bells marking the hours, the farmers' market on Saturdays on the main street where I greeted all the farmers by their names in a row. All this instantly made my heart feel like a stone slowly sinking in my chest, heavy and cold. There is no need, Edward, I said softly, trying to keep my voice calm despite the growing panic. I am rooted here, son. I know this place, each street, each tree. I don't know anyone here in the city, and frankly, I will only be disturbing. You two are busy with work, with your lives. I have my garden, my neighbors, and my jars of plum jam and apple butter to keep me company. Dad? His voice trembled slightly, and I heard something painful in it, something resigned. Paige thinks it is better this way. She says that a son must take care of his aging father. It is our family duty. And what happens if you fall down the stairs? What happens if you have a medical emergency? Who would know? The neighbors? Mr. Jenkins is 82 years old. He can't help you. She already prepared your room. She bought furniture. Please, Dad, don't make this difficult. That phrase, "don't make this difficult," hit me hard. It was exactly what Faith used to say. Don't complicate things. Don't argue. Obey. And the fact that it wasn't we think, but Paige thinks. We don't decide, but she says. I fought to keep my composure, my voice, even trying a gentle resistance of the kind that a father can offer without hurting his son. Edward, I am too old for such drastic changes. At my age, we need reference points. My friends, my morning routine, the coffee at Mrs. Lopez's diner, the walk to the bakery, and especially my garden. I will miss it a lot. I will go crazy with loneliness and boredom in an apartment on the Upper East Side, locked up between 4 walls. Wait, Dad. Paige wants to talk to you. Before I could protest, I heard a background noise, a murmur, then her voice, polite but with steel firmness under the soft professional surface. Arthur, it's Paige. Hi, how are you? Good, thank you, Paige. Listen, I was telling Edward that... Arthur, she interrupted me politely but firmly. We insist that you come to live with us. The apartment is spacious. 2,000 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. You will have your own space, your privacy. Edward needs to know that you are safe, close to the best hospitals in the country if necessary. I, personally, will take care of everything. Your medical appointments, your shopping, everything. It's our family duty. A son who doesn't honor his father. What would people say? You wouldn't want Edward to be ashamed, right? It was almost impossible to reject this implacable logic, this perfectly constructed argument as a legal allegation. However, under the reasonable words, under the apparent request, I detected something calculated, controlled, something that didn't leave room for negotiation. But what could I say? How could I deny myself without seeming ungrateful, selfish, without hurting my son, who I heard in his voice was trapped between two fires? All right. Finally, I gave in after a long silence. The word came out of my mouth like molten, heavy, and final lead. Give me a few days to put my affairs in order, to notify my neighbors. Perfect. She interrupted with a definite and cheerful tone. We'll be there on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock in the morning. Be ready. Edward will organize the move. See you on Saturday, Arthur. And she hung up without passing me back to Edward, without letting me say goodbye to my son. I stayed there in my garden, the phone still stuck to my ear, listening to the monotonous dial tone, feeling like a condemned man who had just heard his sentence. The following days passed in a strange fog. I had few things to carry, all my life condensed in a few suitcases, some comfortable cotton and linen shirts, my wool sweaters for winter, my tweed coat, some precious books, my Robert Frost notebook, my collection of John Steinbeck that I had saved up to buy, my poems by Walt Whitman, and an old photo album framed in velvet that my mother had given me. I sat down at the solid wooden table in the kitchen, the one that had seen so many meals, so many conversations, so many silences too. And I looked at the fragile and yellowish pages of the album. Here was little Edward, perhaps 3 years old, his laughter almost audible through the shiny paper, clinging strongly to my neck in a picnic next to the fireplace, his chubby little hands grabbing my shirt. Here was his first day of kindergarten at Lincoln Elementary. Overwhelmed by his backpack too big, his blue tie slightly twisted, his huge worried eyes looking at the camera. And here was a young man of 22 years, the day of his graduation from NYU. Handsome in his dark suit, serious, proudly holding his diploma, but with something vulnerable in his eyes, an uncertainty that he had never really left. And here was the photo of his wedding. He in a 3-piece pearl gray suit, and next to him, Paige, magnificent in her ivory-colored dress, smiling, triumphant, her hand possessively placed in Edward's arm, and he looking at her with admiration that almost seemed fear. My heart tightened with the fierce and protective love that only a father knows, that love that does not ask for anything in return, that forgives everything, that waits for everything. I closed the album gently, like closing a sacred book. I took my old, rigid Samsonite briefcase, the one that had traveled with me on my only trip abroad to Spain 40 years ago, and I began to fold my life in orderly and manageable piles, repeating the mantra like a prayer. I raised him, I protected him as best I could. He is calling me. He needs me. I must go. It is my duty as a father. That Saturday morning came with cruel brilliance. A perfect blue sky without clouds, birds singing with carefree joy, the kind of day one should be happy. At 10 o'clock in the morning, period. Paige was always punctual, punctuality being one of her many requirements. An elegant Mercedes-Benz, S-Class, shiny black, stopped in front of my little house with blue windows. Edward got off looking tired despite his impeccable suit. A navy blue Ralph Lauren suit, a white shirt with an impeccable collar, without a tie because it was the weekend. He had lost weight. I noticed that his cheeks were more sunken. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed chronic lack of sleep. Paige got off on the other side, impeccable in a gray Armani suit, an Hermes scarf casually knotted around her neck, her Louboutin red heels clacking on the gravel road with an authority that scared the crows. She smiled, but it was a professional smile, calculated, the one she would use with her clients before negotiating an unfavorable contract. "Arthur, what a lovely house," she said, looking around with an air suggesting she was finding the place picturesque, like a museum of rural life, but totally outdated and frankly uncomfortable. "These blue windows are rustic. Edward, help your father with his things. We need to go quickly. I have an urgent file to review tomorrow morning for a meeting on Monday." "No, hello, Dad," for Edward. "No. How are you? Did you sleep well?" "Only efficient orders." Edward immediately ran to the trunk, opened it, then to the house to load my things. I noticed how he avoided Paige's gaze, how fast and nervous his movements were, as if he feared making her wait, as if he were walking on invisible eggshells that could break at any moment. The journey was long and silent. Paige drove aggressively, overtaking on the New Jersey Turnpike at 85 miles per hour, the engine purring softly. She spoke on the phone via the car's Bluetooth, aggressively discussing business strategies with associates, using legal jargon that I did not understand. Due diligence, non-compete clauses, stock options. Edward sat in the front, silent, looking through the window at the landscape that passed. Cornfields, sleeping towns, road signs announcing New York City. The Adirondack Mountains rose majestic in the distance, covered with snow even in July. We arrived on the Upper East Side, one of the most exclusive areas of New York City. An immaculate building, stone facade, iron-forged balconies, massive wooden door with a code and security camera. A uniformed doorman greeted us respectfully. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrison, Mr. Morales." Paige nodded distractedly, already on the phone for another call. We took the elevator, an old model, renovated with mirrors and precious wood, to the 18th floor, the last one. The apartment was cavernous and greeted us with shiny polished oak floors, 12-foot-high ceilings with moldings, Scandinavian design furniture, restoration hardware sofas, glass and steel center tables, contemporary art on the walls, abstract canvases that I didn't understand, but that must have cost a fortune, and a clinical cleaning, even sterile, that gave the impression that no real life took place there, that it was a magazine set, not a home. Everything was white, gray, black, without colors, without warmth, only cold and clean minimalist lines. "Here is your room, Arthur," Paige announced in an efficient tone, opening the door of a room at the end of a long corridor. The room was bright and airy, with a large window that offered a commanding view of Central Park in the distance. A motorized hospital bed, which surprised me. I didn't need one. A designer nightstand, a white IKEA dresser, an uncomfortable modern armchair, a 55-inch flat TV mounted on the wall. Everything was new, impersonal, like a luxury hotel room, or worse, like a private hospital room. "I hope it's comfortable," Paige said, with a smile that seemed practiced. "Dinner is at 7:30 o'clock in the evening. Edward will show you where everything is." That first night set a pattern that would soon become familiar and disturbing. At 7:30 o'clock in the evening, as announced, we sat around the dining table, a huge solid walnut table that could seat 12. But there were only 3 of us, lost at one end. The food was sumptuous. Paige had ordered dishes from a gourmet catering service, Per Se or 11 Madison Park, I suppose. Everything was arranged with photographic precision on porcelain. Wet-aged pot roast, lobster bisque, arugula salad with shaved parmesan, aged cheeses, apple pie with thick cream, much more than 3 people could eat. Paige dominated the conversation, speaking about her work with fierce intensity. She had just won a big case, defending a pharmaceutical multinational accused of anti-competitive practices. She had demolished the argument of the opposition, ridiculed the incompetence of the lawyers from the state universities suing them, obtained a dismissal for her client. "You have to be ruthless in this business," she declared, cutting her pot roast with precise and violent gestures. Weakness is punished. Hesitation is fatal. I always tell Edward, in life, as in business, there are sharks and there are prey. You have to choose your side. Edward silently sat down, barely eating, pushing the food through his plate with his fork. Edward, you have hardly eaten anything, she said suddenly, her voice changing from professional to sharp as a whip that breaks. I paid $350 for this food from 11 Madison Park. This is Gulf Coast lobster, not supermarket garbage. At least you could make the effort to appreciate what I give you. Sorry, my love. It's delicious, really, he murmured, his voice barely audible, his cheeks reddening with shame. I only had a big business lunch this afternoon. A big lunch? She repeated with a cold smile that looked like a mockery. With whom, exactly? Colleagues, people from the marketing department, a mandatory work meeting. Colleagues, she repeated slowly, emphasizing each syllable as if testing its solidity. Men? Women? Both, the whole team. It was... I hope there was nothing inappropriate, she interrupted, looking him directly in the eyes with an intensity that thrilled him. You know how much I hate when you are too familiar with your female colleagues. People talk, people judge. I don't want people to say that Paige Harrison's husband is a womanizer. Nothing happened, Edward said, a little too strongly, a little too defensively. It was just a normal professional meeting. Silence fell like a guillotine. Paige put her fork down with a deliberate slowness, the porcelain tinkling slightly against the table wood. She smiled, but the smile did not rise to her eyes, which remained cold, calculating. Of course, my love, I believe you. But you understand that I have to verify. It is for our good, to protect our reputation, our marriage. Trust, Edward, has to be earned every day. I apologized early that night, claiming fatigue from the trip. But the truth was that I could not bear the tension at that table, the way Edward shrunk under her gaze, the way each word seemed like a test that he could fail at any time. In my room, I lay in the strange hospital bed, looking at the high ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city that never slept. The constant traffic on Fifth Avenue, the occasional sirens, the distant buzz of the subway, everything so different from the crickets and the whisper of the wind in the windows of the house. It was that night that it began. At 3 o'clock in the morning exactly, I was awakened by the sound of running water. At first I thought it was a broken pipe, or perhaps someone had left a faucet open. But it was too strong, too constant, as if someone had opened all the faucets of the main bathroom at the same time. The sound lasted exactly 30 minutes. Then silence. The second night, the same. 3 o'clock in the morning, exactly. The roar of the water for 30 minutes. Then nothing. The third night I got up, put on my wool coat with clumsy fingers, and slid towards the corner aisle, my heart beating in my chest like a war drum. The aisle was submerged in darkness, but a thin strip of bright white light, a hard light, almost blinding, escaped from under the door of the main bathroom, spreading on the polished floor like an accusation. The water was still roaring, violent, relentless. But this time I heard something else, something that made my blood boil, a drowning, desperate sobbing, then immediately suppressed. I got closer to the door. It was not completely closed. There was a space, perhaps 2 fingers wide, just enough to see. And then I looked inside. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. Edward was standing under the shower, completely dressed in his cotton pajamas, pajamas that were now completely soaked, sticking to his thin body. I could see the steam of his breath in the cold air. The cold water fell directly on him from the large Italian shower head, put at maximum pressure. He was shaking violently all over his body, his lips blue from the cold, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. His arms were pressed against his chest in a useless attempt to warm up. Paige was standing next to him, just out of reach of the stream of water, perfectly dry in her white silk coat, immaculate, barefoot on the blue marble. Her right hand firmly held a handful of Edward's hair at the base of his skull, as if holding the reins of a horse that you want to completely dominate. She held him there, forcing him to remain under the cold water that hit his body with calculated violence. "Do you understand?" she repeated, her voice soft but charged with a terrible threat. "Do you understand what happens when you disappoint me? When you dare to lie to me?" "Forgive me," Edward murmured, his voice broken, trembling, barely audible. "Forgive me, Paige. I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to do what?" Paige's voice rose slightly. Not a scream, but a cold and controlled intensity that was worse than a howl. "Didn't you want to have lunch with that secretary without telling me? Didn't you want to lie to me that it was the whole team when it was just the two of you?" "It was just a work lunch," Edward protested weakly, desperately. "To discuss the quarterly report. There was nothing." A slap. The sound of a slap, dry, violent, echoed in the marble tile, viciously cutting through the rustle of the water. Edward's head was hit by the impact, a red mark appearing instantly on his pale cheek. "Don't lie to me," Paige hissed, pulling his hair even harder, forcing his head back, exposing his vulnerable throat. "I had a private detective follow you. You were laughing together. You touched her arm. You looked at her with those dog-eyed eyes you have." "No, I swear that." Slap, another slap, even harder. Edward's body trembled, his knees visibly giving in, but Paige didn't let go of her grip on his hair. On the contrary, she pulled even harder, closer to the stream of icy water that now hit his raised face. Edward drowned, coughed, the water entering his mouth, his nose. He tried to turn his head, but she held him firm. "2 more minutes," she said coldly, looking at the Cartier watch on her wrist. "Maybe that teaches you to respect your wife, not to take me for an idiot." Edward let a silent sobbing escape, drowned, cut in half. The kind of crying a person understands to the bones, that is forbidden to scream, defend, resist. I couldn't move anymore. I couldn't breathe. I stayed there petrified, watching this scene of domestic torture develop in front of me. Because I knew her. I knew her intimately. A thin and fragile rope broke deeply in my chest, the one that had held my memories buried for decades. And suddenly, I was no longer in this luxurious apartment on the Upper East Side. I was in the backyard of our house in Texas Hill Country 30 years ago, a cold and rainy November afternoon. The old rusty metal barrel for rainwater near the garden. Faith, in one of her cold and methodical rages, had dragged me out by the hair, just as Paige held Edward now. She had submerged my head in the barrel's cold water once, twice, 3 times, over and over again, letting me rise just enough to take a desperate breath before submerging myself again. And her voice whispering in my ear between immersions, "You are pathetic. A real man would not allow this to happen to him. But you are not a man. You are a worm." And I, in my cowardice, in my shame, had simply survived. I had not shouted, I had not resisted. I had only waited for it to pass. And the worst, oh, the worst, was the memory of Edward, perhaps 5 years old, who had seen me through the kitchen window, who had run outside in his pajamas. "Dad, Mom, stop, you are hurting him." Faith had immediately let me go. She had turned to our son with a motherly smile. "Dad and Mom are playing, my love. Go back to bed. Go back to bed." Edward had run, terrified. And I, limping on the wet floor, had heard the inner whisper, my own survival mantra. Shh, don't make noise. The child should not know. The child should not understand. Protect him from this. But I had not protected him, had I? I had taught him, with my silent example, that violence was normal, that love looked like this, that victims do not shout, do not defend themselves, only survive in silence. And now, 30 years later, my son was repeating the cycle with a different woman in a different place, but the same hell. When it finally ended, Paige letting go of Edward's hair with a desperate push, he collapsing against the tile wall, shaking violently. I slid back to my room, my legs feeling like lead. I sat on the edge of the strange bed, my hands trembling, my heart beating so fast that I thought I could wake up the whole building. The memories that I had buried so deeply for decades now roared to the surface like a broken dam. It was not only what I had seen, it was the terrible recognition, the understanding that I had failed as a father, in the most fundamental way possible. I had taught my son that this was love. I had modeled victimization as virtue. I had broken the cycle only to discover that I had never broken it at all. The next morning, before the city had fully awakened, I packed my suitcase and left silently, without discussion, without explanation. Just a quick and necessary retreat to the Autumn Leaf, a private residence for older adults in Connecticut. I could not stay, not after what I had seen, not after understanding my own complicity in creating the broken man that Edward had become. Every minute in that apartment was torture. Knowing what was going on behind those elegant walls, knowing that my silence of decades had built the foundations of this hell. The Autumn Leaf was a pleasant place, with well-kept gardens and kind staff, nothing luxurious but dignified. My room was small but comfortable, with a view of a courtyard full of roses and lilacs. In the mornings, I had breakfast in the communal dining room with other residents, mainly widows and widowers like me, people who had reached the end of a life and were looking for peace. 3 days after moving in, I met Paula Morales in the residence cafeteria. She had been a math teacher at the same Roosevelt High School where I taught Spanish. We had shared so many coffee breaks in the teacher's lounge for years, but we had never really talked about personal things. Now, sitting at a table next to the window facing the garden, slowly, cautiously, I began to speak. My son is going through a difficult time in his marriage. Paula looked at me with sudden intensity, her smile fading. Difficult how, Arthur? His wife. She controls him, dominates him, punishes him. I think she is hurting him. Paula put her hand on mine, gently squeezing it. Tell me everything. And I told her. The shower at 3 o'clock in the morning, the cold water, the slaps, the hidden bruises, the terror in Edward's eyes, my own past with my first wife, my cowardly flight from the apartment, my feeling of impotence. When I finished, I felt empty, exhausted, but also strangely relieved. Paula had tears in her eyes. Arthur, she said softly, my daughter Molly went through exactly the same for 5 long years with her husband. A brilliant lawyer, charming in public, a monster in private. He beat her, isolated her, destroyed her, little by little. How did she get out? With help, a lot of help. She took a worn card from her pocket. Attorney Elizabeth Foster, her office is in downtown Manhattan. Call her, explain the situation to her. She will know what to do. That afternoon, in my little room, I stared at the card for an entire hour. Finally, with trembling fingers, I dialed the number. Attorney Elizabeth Foster's firm. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Arthur Morales. Paula Morales gave me her contact information. It is about my son. I think he is a victim of domestic violence by his wife. A few seconds later, a composed but warm female voice. Mr. Morales, this is attorney Elizabeth Foster. Paula told me a lot about you. Tell me everything. And I counted again, from the beginning to the end. When I finished, Attorney Foster remained silent for a moment. Mr. Morales, I will be honest with you. The situation is complex. Legally, while your son does not file a complaint himself or ask for help, my hands are tied. But what I can do is prepare the ground, guide him on how to help him open his eyes, document the abuse, build a solid case for when he is ready to act. What should I do? First, re-establish contact with your son gently, without pressure. Let him know that you are there, that you do not judge him, that you understand. Second, if he agrees to talk to you, guide him to the documentation, injury photos, audio recordings of incidents, a detailed diary of each abuse. Third, build a network of support. The next 2 weeks were an exercise of torturous patience. I called Edward several times, always to his work phone, never to his personal number, which I knew was monitored by Paige. Finally, one Thursday afternoon, around 8 o'clock in the morning, he answered. Dad, it's me. I can't talk for a long time. I went out to buy coffee. She thinks I'm just at the corner store. Edward, listen to me. I know it's difficult. I know you're afraid, but you're not alone, okay? You're not alone. There was a long silence. Then, with a broken voice, Dad, I don't know what to do. She says that if I try to leave, she'll destroy me. She says she has connections, that she can ruin my career, that no one will believe me because I'm a man. Edward, son, listen to me very carefully. There are people who can help you, lawyers who specialize in these cases, but we need evidence. Can you document what she does to you? Another silence. How? Photos of the bruises, audio recordings when she screams or threatens you, a diary of each incident with exact dates and times. Keep everything in a place she can't find. Dad, I'm scared. I know, son. I was also scared for many years. But sometimes the fear of living like this has to be bigger than the fear of acting. Do you have an email she doesn't know? Yes, I have an old one from the university that I never use. Tell me which one it is. Perfect. I'm going to create one too. I'll write to you from Gardner1958.com. Any evidence you gather, send it to me there. And Edward? Yes? I love you. You are my son, and I love you unconditionally. Nothing that is happening is your fault. Do you understand me? For the first time on the call, I heard sobbing. I love you too, Dad. I thought you had abandoned me when you left the apartment. I would never leave you. I left because I needed help to help you. Now I have it. During the following weeks, the evidence began to arrive slowly, terribly, to the secret email. Pictures first. Bruises on arms, purple and yellow on the ribs, on the back, a swollen eye, a broken lip. Then audio files. Paige's voice, cold, methodical. You are pathetic. Look at yourself crying like a baby. A 35-year-old man, regional director, and you are crying. The sound of a slap. You disgust me. Without me, you would be nothing. Absolutely nothing. A failed teacher like your father. The sound of running water. Edward's drowned sobs. Edward's diary was a catalog of horrors. September 12th, at 2:45 o'clock in the morning, he woke me up. He said he went to lunch with the waitress tonight. Cold shower, 20 minutes, 2 slaps. September 15th, at 3:15 o'clock in the morning, angry because I didn't get the promotion at work. He said he was ashamed of me. Cold shower, 30 minutes. He hit me with his belt, 5 slaps on the back. September 18th, at 2:30 o'clock in the morning, he found a text message from my co-worker, Laura, about a project. He accused me of having an affair. Cold shower, 45 minutes. He hit me with a shoe on my legs. September 22nd, at 3 o'clock in the morning. I arrived 10 minutes later from a work meeting. Cold shower. He forced me to kneel and apologize 50 times. September 25th, at 2:45 o'clock in the morning. My phone rang during dinner. It was my boss. She said it was probably a woman. Cold shower. He twisted my wrist. Every entry was a stab in my heart. To see my son reduced to this, meticulously documenting his own humiliation, his own torture, because finally he had found the courage to seek help. But I also felt pride. Fierce pride that he had found the strength to document, to resist in the only way he could. I shared all the evidence with Attorney Foster. She carefully reviewed it, verifying dates, analyzing patterns. Mr. Morales, she told me during one of our weekly meetings in her office, this is enough, more than enough. We have a solid case. But the crucial moment will be when Edward makes the decision to act. That moment will be the most dangerous. Women like Paige Harrison, when they feel they are losing control, can become extremely violent. What do you recommend? When he is ready to leave, he has to be fast, decisive, and with immediate support. He can't hesitate. Once he makes that decision, they have to move immediately. What if she tries to stop him? That's why we need to have everything prepared. The complaint ready to present, a restraining order prepared, even contacts with the police, who can respond quickly if necessary. October passed slowly. The evidence kept coming. More photos, more recordings, more entries in the diary. But I also noticed something else in Edward's communications. A growing determination, an anger that was finally waking up. And then came that call. A Tuesday night. October 25th. My phone rang at 10:37 o'clock in the evening. Edward's number. Dad? His voice was strangely calm. Too calm. The voice of someone who had made an irrevocable decision. I'm going to tell her tonight now that I want a divorce. My blood froze. Edward, no. Not now. Not when you're alone. We said, Dad, I can't anymore. I can't. If I don't do it now, tonight, I'll never do it. I've made the decision. I have to do it. Listen to me. Listen to me very carefully. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm when every instinct was screaming danger. You calmly say, just, Paige, I want a divorce. That's all. No explanations, no justifications, no apologies. Just that sentence. And immediately afterwards, you take your phone, your wallet, and you run to the door. You don't argue, you don't negotiate. You run. Do you understand? I understand. And Edward? Yes? It doesn't matter what happens next. You're not alone anymore, okay? Whatever happens, you're not alone anymore. The minutes that followed were the longest in my life. 10 minutes passed, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Nothing. My phone finally rang. Edward's number. Hello, Edward? But it wasn't Edward's voice. It was Paige's. Cold, furious, dangerous. Arthur, where is my husband? Your son has lost his mind. He just told me he wants a divorce after everything I've done for him. And you, old bastard, You're behind all this, aren't you? Give me Edward immediately. No, Edward is not going anywhere. Edward is staying here with me where he belongs. And she hung up. I immediately called Attorney Foster. He's holding him prisoner. She took his phone. She refuses to let him go. I'm calling the police now. Kidnapping. They're going to intervene. Those 15 minutes were an eternity. Then my phone rang again. An unknown number. Mr. Morales? Captain Jones, Detective Division, Upper East Side Sector, we're on the scene. We forced the entrance to the apartment by emergency order of the prosecutor's office. Your son is fine. He's in shock. He has some contusions, but he's alive and conscious. Mrs. Harrison has been arrested for domestic violence, unlawful imprisonment, and threats. I collapsed in my bed crying with relief. Can I talk to him? One moment. Then Edward's voice, broken, trembling, but alive. Dad? Edward, my God. Edward, are you okay? She, when I told her, exploded. She hit me over and over again. She took my phone. She locked the door. She said she'd kill me before letting me go. Dad, I really thought I was going to. It's over. It's over, son. You're safe now. In the hospital, a forensic doctor meticulously documented every injury on Edward's body. When Edward left the hospital, he came directly to the residence. The administration allowed me to take a double room so that we could stay together during the legal process. The first days were difficult. Edward barely spoke, barely ate. He woke up screaming at night, soaked in cold sweat, with nightmares where Paige chased him with scissors, threatening to cut his face if he tried to leave. But slowly, with psychological therapy and the constant support of Attorney Foster, he began to heal. Dad, he said to me one morning while we were having breakfast in the residence garden, why couldn't I see it before? Why did I allow her to do that to me for so long? Because that's how abuse works, son, I explained to him, remembering my own therapy sessions that had begun. It begins gradually. A criticism here, a small demand there. By the time you realize it, you're already trapped in a pattern where your reality is completely distorted. You think you deserve the punishment. You think you're the problem. But I'm an adult man, educated, successful. How could I be so weak? Physical strength has nothing to do with emotional and psychological abuse, Edward. The smartest, most successful people can be victims. Abuse does not discriminate by gender, education, or social status. What your real strength shows is that you finally decided to seek help, gather evidence, and take action. Attorney Foster and her team worked tirelessly on our case. Paige had hired the best lawyers money could buy. A team from the firm Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen and Katz, known for defending corrupt politicians and businessmen. But we had something they didn't have: the truth and irrefutable evidence. The trial took place 6 months later, in March, in the courts of justice in New York City. Paige had tried to use all her connections to make the case downplayed. But the evidence was too solid, too extensive. The first day of the trial, when Paige walked into the room, perfectly dressed in a black Chanel suit, her hair combed backwards in a severe bun, walking with the same cold arrogance she had always had, I felt a mixture of anger and pity. Because I knew she had also been the victim of something, somewhere in her past, that had turned her into the monster she was now. But then I looked at Edward, sitting next to me on the plaintiff's bench, still too thin, still with visible emotional scars, and all the pity vanished. Whatever Paige had suffered did not justify what she had done to my son. Attorney Foster presented our case methodically, piece by piece. The photos of Edward's body, dated and geolocated by his cell phone, devastating images of bruises in the shape of a hand on his arms, belt marks on his back, a purple eye that had been documented after a particularly severe beating. The complete audio recordings, verified by a forensic expert, confirmed that they had not been altered. Paige's frozen voice telling Edward that he was human garbage, that he should thank her for not leaving him, that without her he would be nothing more than a failure, like his pathetic father. Edward's detailed diary, with dozens of entries describing the abuse, including specific times, descriptions of the punishment showers, and photographs of the resulting injuries. The testimony of the hospital's forensic doctor, who had documented Edward's injuries the night of his rescue, confirming that they were consistent with repeated physical abuse. The testimony of the police who found Edward locked up in the apartment, covered in fresh bruises, in a state of shock. My own testimony about what I had seen that night through the bathroom door. But the stroke of grace came from an unexpected source. The neighbors of the apartment across the hall, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, had recently installed a high-end security camera system at their door. One of the cameras pointed directly to the corridor on the 18th floor and had recorded the night of October 25th. On the screen, we saw Edward running out of the apartment, visibly in panic. Then, Paige appeared, reaching him in the corridor, grabbing him by the hair, violently pulling him back. Edward, trying to fight, Paige slapping him 1, 2, 3 times with terrible force, then dragging him by the hair towards the apartment, while he tried to resist. The image was silent, but you could clearly see Paige's lips moving, spitting poisonous words. You could see Edward fall on his knees, visibly begging her. You could see Paige hitting him again, then dragging him inside and closing the door suddenly. Everything was there on video, irrefutable. Paige's lawyers tried to argue that the photos were forged, that the audio recordings were manipulated, that Edward had invented everything to get money for the divorce. They tried to paint Edward as a weak man who had misinterpreted normal marital discipline as abuse. But when the video was played, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. There was no way to explain, justify, or deny what everyone had seen. Edward's testimony was heartbreaking. With a broken but firm voice, he described years of systematic humiliation, physical and psychological punishments, isolation from friends and family, total control over every aspect of his life. "She convinced me that I was the problem," he said, looking directly at the judge. "She constantly told me that I was a failure, that I should be grateful that someone like her could put up with me. She made me believe that I deserved the punishment because I was not good enough as a husband, as a man." "And the cold showers at 3 o'clock in the morning?" asked Attorney Foster. Edward breathed deeply. It was her favorite way to punish me. She said it was to clean my dirty soul when I had done something that made her angry. She forced me to stand under cold water until my lips turned blue, until I could not stop trembling. Sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for an hour. It depended on how angry she was. "Did you ever seek help?" "I couldn't. She monitored my phones, my emails, my social media. She checked my phone every night. If she found something she didn't like, a message from a co-worker, a missed call from a number she didn't recognize. The punishment was worse. And I was afraid. I was afraid that she would fulfill her threats to destroy my career, to ruin my life." When Paige's lawyer tried to cross-examine Edward, suggesting that he had exaggerated or invented the abuse, Edward maintained his composure. "I have 78 photos of injuries she caused me," he said calmly. "I have 23 audio recordings of her, verbally and physically abusing me. I have a detailed diary of over 100 incidents of abuse over 3 years. If I wanted to invent something, Don't you think I would have been more creative than meticulously documenting my own humiliation? The verdict arrived 2 weeks later. After a careful examination of all the evidence presented, the judge announced, "This court finds that Mrs. Paige Harrison is guilty of habitual domestic violence, unlawful imprisonment, and threats of death against her husband, Mr. Edward Morales." Consequently, the court orders: first, the divorce is granted with all fault attributed to Mrs. Harrison. Second, the division of marital property will be carried out with equitable distribution, increased by a financial compensation of $1 million paid by Mrs. Harrison to Mr. Morales for moral and physical damages suffered. Third, Mrs. Harrison is sentenced to 4 years in prison, 2 suspended for habitual domestic violence and unlawful imprisonment. Fourth, a permanent restraining order prohibiting Mrs. Harrison from approaching Mr. Morales within 1,000 yards under penalty of immediate incarceration. Fifth, mandatory psychiatric care for Mrs. Harrison for a minimum duration of 5 years. Edward, sitting next to me, burst into sobs, not of sadness, but of relief, of liberation. For years he had believed that he was the broken one, the flawed one, the one who deserved punishment. Now, finally, a court had confirmed what I had tried to tell him, that he was the victim, not the perpetrator. That night, in our shared room at the residence, Edward hugged me for the first time in years. "Thank you, Dad, for not abandoning me, for believing me, for helping me get out of this. I would never have abandoned you, son. I only regret taking so long to understand, to act. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. You saved me. You saved yourself, Edward. I only helped you find the door." A year passed. Edward rented a small apartment in Greenwich Village, 2 bright rooms near a park. Nothing luxurious, but it was his space, safe, peaceful. He continued with therapy. Gradually, he returned to work. First part-time, then full-time. One day, 8 months after the trial, he showed me a photo on his phone. "Dad, I want you to meet someone. Julie. We worked together in the communications department. We started having lunch together, just as friends at first. But I think it's turning into something more." I looked at the photo. A young woman with short brown hair, warm green eyes, smiling naturally at the camera. No cold sophistication, no calculated perfection, just obvious kindness radiating from her face. "She looks nice, son." "She is," he hesitated. "She knows everything. I told her everything. The marriage to Paige, the abuse, the showers, everything. And she didn't judge me, she just said she admired my courage." 3 months later, Edward and Julie were officially together. He introduced her to me one Sunday. We had lunch together at a small restaurant near the residence. Julie was charming, natural, fun. She gently teased Edward, making him laugh in a way that I had not heard since his childhood. And most importantly, she looked at him with obvious respect, sincere admiration, but without that possessive and dangerous intensity that Paige had always had. "Mr. Morales," she told me at the end of the meal, "Edward told me that you saved him, that without you, he might be dead. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for not abandoning your son." "He saved himself," I replied, putting my hand on Edward's. "I only held the door open." Today, 2 years after the trial, my life has found a peace that I had never known before. My days are simple and structured. In the morning, gentle exercise with other residents, then communal breakfast. In the afternoon, I still work a little. Freelance translations, a few hours a week. Then, I read in the garden under the lilacs that bloom every spring with purple explosions that remind me that beauty can exist after pain. And 3 times a week, Edward comes to lunch with me, often with Julie. Now they talk about their plans. They are looking for a bigger apartment. They even talk about marriage eventually, but without rush, taking their time. Edward has learned that real love has no urgency, no impossible demands, no punishment for small human mistakes. On Sundays, when the weather is nice, we walk together near the Brazos River, slowly, because my knees are no longer what they were. And we talk about everything and nothing, about the past without shame, about the present with gratitude, about the future with hope. "Do you know what I learned, Dad?" Edward told me one day, as we watched the boats pass on the water. "What, son?" "That family is not just blood. It is the people who stay when everything collapses. It's you. It's Julie now. It's Attorney Foster who fought for me. It's Paula who guided you. Family are those with whom we are no longer afraid, those with whom we can be vulnerable without risk of being hurt." I nodded, tears in my eyes. "You're right. And you know what? You are the bravest man I know." "I don't feel brave. I just feel relieved. I'm living for the first time in a long time. That is courage. It is not the absence of fear. It is continuing despite the fear. You survived hell and found the courage to leave, to testify, to rebuild. Many never achieve it." Edward's relationship with Julie has blossomed in ways that fill me with hope. It is not the obsessive and possessive passion he had with Paige, but something deeper, healthier. They laugh together. They support each other. They give each other space to grow individually. Julie has her own successful career as a graphic designer, her own friends, her own interests. She does not try to control Edward or mold him to her image. And Edward has recovered parts of himself that I thought were lost forever. His genuine laughter, his intellectual curiosity, his ability to dream about the future without fear. He has returned to playing the guitar, something he had abandoned during his marriage to Paige, because she said the noise bothered her when she tried to work. One Saturday afternoon, Julie brought his guitar to the residence. They sat in the garden, under the orange trees, and Edward played songs he remembered from his youth. "This Land Is Your Land," "Amazing Grace," "Home on the Range." He played the last one with an ironic smile, as if reclaiming the word home from the clutches of his traumatic past. Julie sang with him, her voice clear and sweet, harmonizing with his. Other residents came closer, some with tears in their eyes as they listened to melodies that reminded them of happier times. At that moment, seeing my son play music again, seeing the light in his eyes, I knew we had won. We had not only survived, we had healed. But the real test came a few months later. Edward received a letter at work. It was from Paige, sent from the prison where she was serving her sentence. "Dad," he told me on the phone, his voice slightly trembling, "I received a letter from her." My heart stopped. "What does it say?" "She says she's been in therapy in prison, that she finally understands what she did to me, that she's sorry, that when she gets out she wants to try to be friends." "And how do you feel about that?" A long silence. "I feel sorry for her, because I know she was also a victim of someone at some point. But I also feel clarity. I don't want to see her ever again. I don't want to be her friend. I don't owe her forgiveness. I don't owe her anything." I felt a fierce pride for my son. "You're right. Forgiveness is for you, not for her, and only you decide if and when to forgive. But you never have to forget, and you never have to put yourself in danger again. I'm going to write her a short letter. I'm going to tell her that I don't want any contact with her, now or in the future, and that if she tries to contact me again, I will involve the police. That sounds perfect. A week later, Edward showed me the letter he had written. Paige, I received your letter. I'm glad to know that you are receiving professional help. However, I do not wish to have any contact with you, now or in the future. What happened between us cannot be fixed with apologies. The harm you did to me, physical, emotional, psychological, has changed my life forever. I have moved on. I have a new life, people who love me in a healthy way, and peace. There is no place in that new life for you. Do not write to me again. Do not try to contact me in any way. If you do, I will involve the authorities. Edward. It was perfect. Firm but not cruel, clear but not vengeful. The kind of boundary that a healthy man sets with someone who hurt him. At night, sometimes I still wake up around 3 o'clock in the morning. That cursed hour that will forever be etched in my memory. But now, instead of anguish, I feel gratitude. Because my son is free. Because the cycle of violence that Faith, my first wife, had begun, which I did not know how to break, finally ended. Because Edward will not repeat our mistakes. Now he knows how to recognize the signs. He knows that love does not hurt, that violence is never justified, that no one deserves to be abused, regardless of the excuses, justifications, or promises of change. And most importantly, he knows that there is help, that there are people who care, that there are laws that protect, that there are professionals who know how to break these destructive cycles. Last month, Edward began working as a volunteer with a non-profit organization that helps victims of domestic violence. Once a week, he goes to a community center in the Bronx and talks with men who are going through situations similar to the one he lived through. It's strange, he told me after his first session. I always thought I was the only man going through this, but there were 12 men in that room, all with similar stories, all convinced that they were weak, that it was their fault, that no one would believe them. How did you feel talking to them? Useful. For the first time in a long time, I felt that my pain had a purpose, that everything I went through was not in vain if I can help a single person get out faster than I did. 2 weeks ago, Edward and Julie announced their engagement. Nothing extravagant. He proposed to her during a walk in Central Park, no expensive ring, no big production, just genuine love, expressed simply. When will the wedding be? I asked him. In 6 months. Something small, intimate. Only real family and true friends. Maybe 30 people in the garden of the residence, if they give us permission. I would love that. Dad, will you walk me down the aisle? Not in the traditional way where the father gives away the daughter, because that is possessive and outdated, but just as support, as a testimony to how far we have come together. I broke. It would be the greatest honor of my life. Life, I learned during my 67 years, has a cruel way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them. But it also has an infinite capacity for healing, for growth, for redemption. My story, our story, mine, Edward's, the story of all victims who suffer in silence, did not end with the abuse. It ended with liberation, with justice, with healthy love replacing toxic love. Evil never disappears by itself. You have to fight against it. With courage, yes. With help, absolutely. With the will to break the silence, to testify, to endure even when it is terrifying. If my story can help a single person recognize the signs, find courage, ask for help, break the silence, then everything will have been worth it. Because no one should live in terror. No one should be tortured in their own home. No one should have to choose between their life and their freedom. There is always help. People who care, professionals who know, laws that protect. It only takes a first step, a phone call, a word confided to the right person. And freedom, even if it seems impossible, even if it is scary, is always within reach. You just have to find the courage to reach out and take it. Domestic violence does not discriminate. It affects men and women, rich and poor, educated and ignorant. But recovery is also possible for everyone. Edward now helps other men who thought they were alone. I share our story so that other fathers know how to recognize the signs, how to help their children. The cycle can be broken. True love exists. Life after abuse is not only possible, it can be beautiful. Did you like my story? If you listened to the end, leave a number 1 in the comments. If it helped you, you can support me by liking the video and leaving a tip. I have many other life stories like this on my channel, Grandpa's Advice. So don't forget to subscribe and watch them. Also tell me in the comments where you are watching us from. I have added 2 new stories on the screen that everyone loves. Thanks for being here. See you next time.